Hello, my name is Colleen and I am the interim chair of the School of Social Work at Cal State LA, and I also am the chair of the Hall of Distinction, and the Hall of Distinction is a subcommittee of the California Social Welfare Archives. So that is my role, and I'm here to interview Kathy Kubota, also known as Kathleen Kubota, and she is a friend of mine for many years, and we had known each other at separate times at UCLA and known each other over a long course with our association with the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services. So with that, we're going to bring on Kathy and learn all about her social work career. Okay, so Kathy, congratulations on your soon-to-be induction into the California Social Work Hall of Distinction on October 27th this year. This is wonderful.
Well, thank you, Colleen. It's a big surprise to me, and I'm really not feeling very worthy of a significant award like this, especially after I saw who the other inductees have been. A lot of friends and a lot of big names in the history of social work, locally especially.
Okay, well, the committee thought you were very worthy. So this is good news, and today we're here to find out about your career, and I have a sort of a series of questions, so I wanted to start at the beginning and ask you, how you became a social worker, what motivated you, and if you could just sort of free associate to that.
Okay, well, when I graduated from college, my undergraduate degree from UCLA, I really didn't have a specific program or profession to relate to, and the county was hiring at that point. This was in the latter days of the ample funding for social workers from the federal government. Mm-hmm. So among the jobs that were available was called social worker, but we were now what is known as eligibility workers. So I applied for that job, and lo and behold, I was hired, and actually enjoyed the job and enjoyed the people I worked with and the clients especially. My first assignment was in Watts on 103rd Street. And like many of my cohorts, I vowed I would only keep this job because I had never worked for government. I would only keep the job for 5 years. And 32 years later was when I retired. In the middle of all that, Title IV-E stipends became available for a number of people, and in particular me as a mid-career bureaucrat, to go to social work school. And that's what got me there. I was accepted at UCLA, and one of the things I thought about a lot while I was doing this was what difference will it make to go to graduate school mid-career when I've worked for a welfare program, so to speak, for 20 years, maybe 15 years. And the interesting thing, and I still remember this so well, I was talking with Gloria Waldinger about it, and she told me that it puts a frame around everything you've done and a context for how it gets done. And it just was a really very significant explanation for me to chew on for the next couple of years while I was in school.
That's great, Kathy. We love to hear that people went to graduate school on a Title IV-E stipend. So then you went to school on a Title IV-E stipend, and then you began to work in Title IV-E. So once you came out of graduate school, where did you go?
Well, I was at that point a middle manager in program development at the Department of Public Social Services headquarters. The child welfare program was still a part of the welfare department. Mm-hmm. A few years later, after the passage of H.R. 1, the social services program were split off from the AIDS payments programs. The other thing that happened during that time was when someone in the county figured out that 4A funds were available for foster care placement and the administration of the program, it was transferred from the probation department to DPSS because DPSS was the 4E agency.
Okay.
So I had already spent some time as what we called a dependency worker, meaning I had a foster care caseload and kind of didn't really feel like I belonged anywhere else except with a child welfare program.
Okay. Wow. So tell us more about how your career developed. I mean, what was your primary area of focus? Because you say, you were in the Bureau of Assistance Payments, and that's where child welfare was located. Then there was a division. But then tell me, how did your career develop after that?
Well, when I went to graduate school, I wanted to focus on policy and administration management. And the nice thing was that the school really allowed me to be creative with my curriculum. And I was even able to take a school in the Graduate School of Management.
Wow.
And planning and get a different perspective completely from how to run a program and what your goals should be.
Wonderful.
I returned to then DPSS because I graduated with my MSW in 1982, and in 1984, if I remember correctly, was when the Department of Children's Services was created. So at the time, I was kind of on the sidelines because I was working for a program known as ICAN, the Interagency Council on Child Abuse and Neglect. And although our budget and basically the administration was transferred with to Children's Services, we were not in the line of fire, so to speak. Nobody thought much about what we would do vis-a-vis the actual operation of the program. So shortly after that, I was offered a position back with the Department of Children's Services, and that's where I went. But I thought about this a lot, and I thought about this even while I was working. I spent a long time with a public agency, and what kept me going was that I was able to change assignments often. I think the longest time I spent in one assignment was in governmental relations, and that was almost 10 years.
Wow.
But prior to that time, I worked in adoptions, and I worked with a special program called RAP, the Runaway Adolescent Program. I've forgotten what that stands for. And a number of other assignments that gave me a lot of flexibility and a lot of insight into the various aspects of the community and the service provider agencies. One of the things I enjoyed a lot about RAP is that most of our collateral agencies were private nonprofits. And so we worked with a group that Gary Yates at Children's Hospital put together, consisting of runaway shelters and service programs. And nobody really paid too much attention to what we were doing and how we were doing it, except that Judge Todd, who was then the presiding judge of the juvenile court, heard about what we were doing and invited me to go to a National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges Conference in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So that was a big highlight. And then Dr. Rothman at UCLA was doing a study and following the statistical data, and I believe he published an article in one of the journals, and I was just looking at something that Gary Yates had authored in adolescent medicine, and he singled out our participation because our program was pretty unique throughout the country. So it was a difficult time, but it was also a highlight in my career because we got to do a lot of things that no one else was doing.
Wow, when you say it was a difficult time, or you say it was difficult because, we were first grappling with what to do with homeless use, or are you talking about the political climate of the day, or what makes it difficult?
More the issue of the homeless youth. Okay. The program had started, but ran into some operational problems, and they needed a director, and so I was offered the job, and I thought, well, why not? I didn't know much about runaway kids, but I definitely learned. So wow. It was a great experience.
Okay, so then from RAP, was your next move to go over to UCLA?
I believe so.
Okay, tell us what happened and how you got that job.
Well, when it was realized that Title IV-E would pay for, I believe I was a Title 20 student actually, but Title IV-E would pay for social work training for current and prospective employees, child welfare workers. The deans of the schools of social work at UCLA, USC, and Long Beach, and the director of our department, who was Peter Degree, decided that they would do a local program. And the schools did some very creative matching of the funding. And I mean, it was all legal, but it was different than had been done before. And DCFS was able to access the 4E funds, and we began the program to begin training, or the professional training for social workers in the department. So I was asked to be the first director of that project, which was great fun. I worked with Paul Carlo from USC and Jan Black?
Yes, Jan Black, yes.
From Long Beach. Excuse me. We got along really well, and the deans seemed to enjoy it as well, such as they could enjoy a program like that. But we did get a lot of attention from across the country because we preceded CSWA. CSWA was still ironing out a lot of agreements and relationships between the then still and even more now, the number of schools of social work in California. And I think that it's amazing, really, how many schools there are now that all were able to access this funding and were able to train people to work with our clients in both rural and urban communities.
It is amazing. It's amazing. So you were at UCLA for how many years, and then what happened after UCLA?
Well, I was only there for a little more than 2 years when I was offered the legislative director position at DCFS.
Okay.
And Wanda Ballinger took the position after I left, which was a perfect fit because she had also worked for the county in the Department of Adoptions.
Okay.
So she had that perspective from both angles. I really did enjoy working as a legislative director. Peter had a kind of a checkered reputation, shall we say, but one thing he didn't do was try and tell me how to do my job.
Okay.
And so he just told me what he wanted, and then I had to get it done.
Yeah.
So some of the things he wanted were sometimes relatively easy, and other times they were almost peculiar.
Okay.
But I was his employee and he was the boss, and so I had to do what I had to do. And I really did enjoy, though, the creative part of working on legislative issues and also the advocacy part of it, because I was also able to speak to and come in contact with various other human services and social work agencies and schools in the Southern California area, as well as advocate in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. sometimes for the programs that we believed were so vital to accomplishing our goals.
So for any of the students that might be listening to this interview, can you think of any strategies you use to accomplish your goals, or any sort of tips for advocacy that you would give to students that are looking to this as a career?
Absolutely. The most important thing to getting the job done in the legislative arena is to coalition with every group that you can think of. If it's not taking the lead on a specific piece of legislation, it's supporting the person and the author of any bill or legislative budget proposal that is important to you, either because you would support it or because you would want it to be defeated.
Okay.
You really need to get out there and talk up your program and your concerns about whatever it is you're working on at the time. I was also fortunate to be able to testify before various committees, and when some of the welfare reform legislation was being enacted, and enacted in California in particular, I felt very satisfied that I could go to a legislative committee hearing and remind them that our clients in child welfare were amongst the neediest, and cutting off welfare benefits to the families, because the proposal was for a 2-year limit on welfare, would make it almost impossible for some people to ever get their children back, which was really one of our primary goals.
So you're speaking about the general welfare reform under the Clinton administration,
right.
and a lot of people felt very strongly about it. Do you remember something, for somebody that's watching this interview, that really stuck out for you at that particular time, besides your work in California?
I think it really was the lack of any knowledge or understanding of how the welfare program affects the child welfare caseload.
Okay.
And how to remind people that our clients are not, or I've never been necessarily the person who has the means to be able to deal with all the legal requirements and so forth in the court actions, but rather they had a tendency to be the people who were the least able in all variety of ways. And it was our responsibility to advocate for them on the macro level as well as the micro level.
So, out of that, you said that you enjoyed advocating for them and you felt some sense of accomplishment. Give us some other things that you felt a sense of accomplishment from.
You mean in my work? Or?
Yeah, in your work.
Well, there was the RAP program, and then working at UCLA was great fun. I got to know a number of the staff and faculty on a personal basis in a way that, as a peer rather than as a student, which is not to say being a student is a bad thing, but you just are so involved in your coursework and your master's thesis that you didn't always have the time or the opportunity to get to know your faculty and field faculty as individuals. Some of the people that I got to know that I still have the utmost respect for included, for instance, someone on your committee, Joe Nunn.
Oh, okay.
Who I think is one of the stellar examples of our profession. And as I mentioned earlier, well, I knew Gloria from NESW, but she was also on the field faculty at UCLA. Jane Kurhara, who was also field faculty. Jean Giovanoni, who I just love dearly, who's not with us anymore, and same with Walter Furman, who was responsible for research activities. Rosina Becerra, who's my thesis advisor and who I see occasionally, very occasionally now. And but there is one person that I want to acknowledge that I had known for many, many years, who was probably the greatest influence on my becoming a professional social worker.
Oh, tell us.
Marcina Buck.
Oh, tell us more about Marcina Buck.
Well, how did I get to know Marcina? I was a baby social worker out there long before I went to graduate school, and she was responsible with another woman for bringing the program, the child welfare, then called Section 600 of the Welfare and Institutions Code, over from the probation department to then DPSS. And Marcina was a very dynamic personality, and I got to know her better and better as time went by. And then at some point, she took over a program in juvenile court services where I was assigned. And in fact, her predecessor, Louisa Moore, told me she would be at the event. But anyway, I got to know Marcina both on a personal and a professional basis, and I thought the world of her. She told me that I had better go to graduate school, and I never wanted to find out what would happen if I didn't.
That's funny.
So I undertook the process, and here I am.
You know, so many of these people you mentioned are already been inducted into the Hall of Distinction, so you're in great company.
I sure am. I looked at the listing from the very beginning, and a lot of the things that I could find on the website, and watched, for instance, Ellen Dunbar accept her induction. I worked with Ellen. Actually, it was a volunteer situation because Ellen was then the executive director of NASW State Chapter.
Right.
And I was on the board of NASW State Chapter at the time. She left and left us in the lurch to go open that school in Stanislaus County.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe 6 months to a year later, Jan Lee became the director, executive director. Anyway, I watched the entire interview where Nancy Humphreys interviewed Ellen in this same situation, and the names that both of them referred to and the experience that they talked about, many of which I didn't know or I had not experienced, was really enlightening, and there's kind of a sentimental quality to it because it kind of is the story of my working life.
Wow. And so someone is going to be watching this interview and say, oh, there's a sentimental quality to what Kathleen Kubota is saying. It's the story of my working life.
Yeah, because I had a very close attachment to a lot of these people. Yeah. And it wasn't just because of work or professional association or school or whatever. I got to know them as human beings, and they were as nice to me as anyone could be.
That's wonderful. So we've talked a lot about all your successes, but when in these interviews, we like to have beginning students think, well, what was it like when you tried something and you didn't hit the mark and you felt disappointed? How did you cope with it, and what kind of advice do you have for students that are struggling with that now?
Oh boy, there were a lot of those situations. I think it has to also relate to your outlook on life. And okay. One situation like that is not going to destroy your whole life or your whole career or all your opportunities for advancement or other mm-hmm. jobs or mm-hmm. anything like that. You have to just pick up the pieces and keep on working at it. I think that the positive accomplishments really did outweigh any of the negative experiences I might have had. So it kept me going until the day that I decided that I didn't want to work anymore. And the emphasis in the department had changed. Peter had left, uh-huh. and we had a new director, and things were just not the same anymore. To be honest, she was not from the human services arena. She was from a private, for-profit context. She really had no understanding of, for instance, our professional values, the goals that we had always honored and kept in all those years of working. And she didn't really have any experience in the legislative arena or in advocacy. And it really kind of made the job not very interesting anymore.
You had the option to be able to retire because it wasn't as interesting as it had been. But do you have advice for people that sort of are not at that point? They don't have that option yet. They get a new boss or director who has a dramatically different focus and perhaps different goals, and you have to sort of hang in there for a while and see if it will work. What strategies would you recommend for people that are going to stay?
Well, it really depends a lot on what stage of life you're in. If you're a new social worker, you might have the flexibility to look around for other things that are more consistent with what your beliefs and values are. You also need to understand that retirement planning, no matter what age you are, is always important, and learn about what's available to you or what you can create for yourself. And you have to be very disciplined about managing your money and your life and your career and things that will make a difference in 30 or 40 years, even though that horizon seems like an impossible length of time. It comes quicker than you'll ever imagine. But I have to put in a plug for my husband, although I didn't marry him because I thought he was rich. He was a public servant like me,
Yes.
and we had known each other for quite a while, and he was always very supportive. And that, too, I mean, if I had decided earlier on that I wanted to change jobs and go to another position that didn't provide the kind of security that I had working for the county, if it was really something that was going to be satisfying for me and make me happy, I know that he would have supported me, whatever it was. And in fact, I was very young when I retired. I was nowhere near eligible for Social Security or any other benefit, although I was eligible for my county retirement. But you know, when we retire at a young age in that system, you don't get a lot. You get a smaller proportion of what you might otherwise be eligible for if you had worked until you couldn't work anymore.
Okay.
But I told him I just couldn't do it anymore, and he said it's okay, that I could retire if I wanted to. So actually, in Los Angeles County, I think it's still the same way, but I'm not sure. We could begin collecting our retirement when we're 50. And I was just a few years past that when I decided I just couldn't do it anymore.
Wow.
So he was very supportive and always has been.
That's wonderful, Kathy. So then you retired. Did you do something totally different with your volunteering, or did you do anything that was connected to social work?
I did for a while sit on the board of El Nido Family Services. And actually it was Jean Giovanoli and Walter Furman who talked me into it. And I did have the pleasure of meeting Liz Herrera, who is still the director. She's an outstanding social worker, and it was very nice to get to know her. I think we were in the same class at UCLA, but I never really knew her that well. You know, I've just lost my train of thought.
Where else did you decide to volunteer? So you first went in, you were volunteering on the board of El Nido, and did you do anything else with your retirement time?
I did. I have been doing the things that I probably always wanted to do from my youth until now, but never really had the time or the opportunity because my life was pretty much focused on work or school or things like that. And so now I'm a volunteer at Descanso Gardens, where I work in the Rose Garden. And I sing with a group known as the Verdugo Hills Women's Chorus.
Oh, wow.
So gardening and music are two things that I've always loved in life, and that's what I'm able to do now on my own time frame and my own schedule. And there's something that, can I read this to you?
Sure.
It's something that I'm going to say at the event, the induction event. It's dance like no one is watching, love like you'll never be hurt, sing like no one is listening, live like it's heaven on earth. And so it's really get the most out of every day that you can, and where you are not able to because of other maybe foci and priorities, there will come a time when you'll be able to take advantage of all the good things that you've experienced and worked on for those years.
That's great. So let's take this interview into a couple of more questions here about what do you see, how has the political and social climate changed during the course of your career as it pertains to social work? How has the political and social climate changed? And what do you think social work should really be focused on now?
Do you mean until the time I retired or up until today?
How about if we talk about today, up until today? How do you think it's changed?
Oh my gosh. Well, anybody who watches this, who understands what's going on in our country right now, will know that it's like night and day. All of the vulnerable fields and individuals that we cherished are falling by the wayside. So that's where advocacy comes back into play. There were things that we had to do while I was still working that were sometimes harder and sometimes easier, but I don't think there's anything that's been as difficult as what we're dealing with now. And I think that everyone should take the opportunity to figure out what's going on. And if you value, for instance, our social work ethics and goals, then you'll need to get involved one way or another, even if it's a matter of voting and educating yourself about what the various proposals are. It really pays to understand what's going on and do something about it. It sounds very simplistic, but it's a giant undertaking, and I think we all need to be aware of what risks we're facing right now under the current administration, and how much worse it can be if things don't change dramatically.
So you mentioned getting involved yourself in either voting or educating yourself, and also in advocacy. What kind of advice do you have for students that are coming into social work right now and they're thinking, how can I be an advocate? It seems like all the avenues are closed off. It doesn't seem like it's going to work. It doesn't seem like I'm going to be heard or listened to. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that's where aligning yourself with various coalitions and other groups who are going to work in the same direction that you think is important are probably the most viable resources that you can find. If it's campaign work or advocating for whatever items are on the state's agenda, or working for a candidate that you think is probably the most significant and the most instrumental in getting what you want done, then there are a variety of things to do. Certainly learning the issues and understanding what they really mean and what the implications are, not only for yourself, but for your clients.
That's great. So I have another question. If you had to do it over again, would you do anything differently?
Oh, probably not, because I wouldn't have had that kind of foresight. Maybe I would have stuck with something longer. Maybe it would have been longer than 2 years or 4 years. But I think for someone, I perceive myself as being flexible, but not really, I don't know what's the word. I can make the changes, but it's often difficult for me. It's the prospect of the unknown can be very frightening. So I think it's kind of amazing that I was able to do all those things without being immobilized by fright.
Yeah. So what do you attribute that to? That's an excellent point that people watching this video would say, you took like several jobs without having much experience with that particular population or in that particular issue, and you took them and you didn't seem to hesitate, and then you worked in them and you seemed to thrive and have success. So what would you say to somebody who's sort of doubting their ability to adapt to a job or take a job where they don't have every single thing they need? What would you say?
I would say that if your constitution can handle it, then go for it, because you will learn, and there will be people that you will work with who will help you. It's a matter of the alliances and being open to new ideas and taking a risk. You have to, I think, have enough confidence in yourself and your previous experience and your education to know that it can come to something better for you, and it can broaden your horizons. One of my professors at UCLA noted on one of my papers in his class that I was persistently curious.
Wow.
Because I always did ask questions. I always wanted to know what all these various things were. And this was long before the internet, so I couldn't Google all these questions. So I had to find out from whomever I could to either be directed towards researching an issue or paying attention to those who were already working in that area or in the field, and go for it.
Kathy, it strikes me that many of your jobs were working in a fields that were they were social work related, but they were also male dominated. So what was that like for you to work perhaps in the legislature, where most of the people in the legislature were male? Maybe perhaps most of even the aides were males, or attorneys, or something like that. What was that like for you as a woman?
To be honest with you, didn't worry about it too much. They were male-dominated professions, but I don't know, I just never felt, I'm sure there were instances where my expertise or advocacy were not valued because I was a female, and still am, but it didn't feel like it hampered me that much.
Okay.
I felt like I was still well received and could speak out for what it was I was working on. I think you do have to be careful that you're not going to step on anybody's toes, because especially in the legislative arena, they, shall I say, can be, not always are, but can be ego involved. And if you say the wrong thing to someone, you can kind of ruin any opportunity for progress at another time.
So there was a certain amount of planning and strategy that went into your approach to individuals.
Well, no, I think it had to do more with the way I was raised and my culture.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, I came from a very traditional Japanese American family, and talking back was not something I was allowed to do. My dad in particular was born in the States but raised in Japan, and his values were very old world. In fact, there was a time when Marcina Buck had offered me a position as Director of Social Services in Stanislaus County, which of course would have meant that I'd have to move to Modesto. And when I told my parents, my father in particular was very unhappy. He didn't want me to leave. I mean, we were not, I was in the generation where even though I didn't do this, if you were a female child, you didn't leave home until you were leaving home to live with your husband.
Aha.
I left home when I got my first full-time job.
Okay.
So it was slightly different. But my parents had moved to an area in East Los Angeles known as City Terrace, which is like across the freeway from Cal State LA.
Sure.
And they moved there because of its proximity to the school. They expected that it would facilitate, the three of us, my two sisters and I, would facilitate our completing our educations. So I started my bachelor's program at Cal State LA.
Wow.
I came home after my sophomore year and announced at the dinner table that the next semester I was transferring to UCLA. And there was just deathly silence because it was like a good 25 miles across town, and there were all sorts of things to iron out, like any increased costs and transportation and the fact that we were so close to a perfectly good school, except
Sure.
we didn't have social work was not in the picture at that time. But I wanted to go to UCLA, and so I did it, and I survived. And my mother, my dear mother, after I graduated from school, would always introduce me to people as her UCLA graduate.
Wow.
But it was a public school and the costs were not huge.
Okay.
So coming to a private school would have been almost impossible for me. So I did what I thought would be the most satisfying to me, and at the same time serve me well in the long run.
It sounds like it did.
I think so.
Yeah, and then when you went back for your MSW, you were already comfortable with UCLA. So that might have been another reason maybe why you made the decision to go back to school. Didn't you go to you went to UCLA for your MSW?
I did. Actually, they accepted me first.
Oh.
So I went. I mean, I was anxious to get all my ducks in a row and get a leave of absence or take care of my stipend from work and all those kinds of things. And it just all fell into place, and I have no regrets about doing any of those things. The difficult part was financially. We were paid a certain amount for a stipend, and I added up my budget a number of ways, and I figured if I didn't eat, didn't have to buy gasoline, and never bought any clothes, I probably could survive on 5/8 salary, which is what our stipend was.
Wow.
But
Wow.
I still have no regrets. It was a challenge, but I survived.
So for other Title IV students who might be looking at this interview, what would you say? Would you recommend that they take the Title IV stipend? How did it change your life?
Well, it changed my life in a way that it opened all additional sorts of opportunities. I was very proud to be able to say I had the professional training, and it legitimized what I was doing and how I did it, and I think meant something, my credibility, it meant something to the people I was working with. I would always recommend that someone go to graduate school. Of course, these days, I think a lot of the people that are hired as new caseworkers will often have degrees in human services of some type or another, BSWs or degrees in psychology or sociology or allied areas. So that helps a lot. But I'm pretty convinced that social work is the best degree for the kind of work we have to do. You do have to be creative sometimes and put together solutions, find the solutions to the problems you and your clients or your clients are confronting. And I think that learning about the profession and grounding yourself in its value system is as important as anything. So I think anyone who's contemplating going to graduate school, it also gives you a lot of flexibility because you can always go to another place and get another job.
Perfect.
Another agency or any number of things. I have a friend who's daughter is currently working at DCFS, and it's really fascinating because I don't know the whole story, but she's actually an attorney. And I guess she found that being an attorney was not what she wanted to do with her life, but rather it was working with families and children. And so she left the career of law, her career, and switched to social work. So she's living proof that there are other things you can do with your life.
You know, we talked a little bit about your time at NASW and that you were a representative to the board, and there was this period when Ellen had left to go to Stanislaus, and there was a period of 6 months where there wasn't an executive director, and then Jan Lee came on. I think you were in a leadership position at that point in time. Can you talk about that and how that might have been my guess is that was difficult.
It was horrible.
Oh, okay. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you get through it?
I try not to think about it too much. I was starting the new job as director of legislative affairs, and having Ellen as opposed to her successor, the interim successor, was like night and day. Ellen Dunbar was always someone that you could trust and respect, and even if she didn't have a specific example, could help guide you in the right direction. Well, the person who was the interim, personality-wise and education-wise, didn't have that background.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably would have fallen in the category of some of the things that I would have liked to have done differently.
Oh, okay. All right.
It also, I agreed to run for chapter president at the same time that I had been offered an opportunity to run for a national office. And that probably killed any chances I would ever have had to become involved with NASW National on a larger scale, which is unfortunate. I would have liked to have done that, but it happened and there wasn't any changing it at that point.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad we went back over it and talked a little bit about the NASW material and the days of NASW. But we traversed a lot of things here. We started from your early career, we started in your then we talked more about your transition to your mid-career, and then we talked about your retirement at the age of a little bit over 50. And I'm just wondering if there's other comments you want to make in closing, because I think people watching this interview will get a lot out of your experience, your recommendation of Title IV-E, your discussion of advocacy and the importance of making coalitions. But before we wrap up, I just wondered if there's something else you thought, I really want to say this today, and I really want to make sure that I memorialize this thought.
Well, I think one thing that you pointed out that I always could live with was that being a public agency employee gave me a lot of security. I did take that leave of absence and go work at UCLA, which is, I guess you could consider it a public organization, or it was covered by a retirement system and Social Security, which the county doesn't participate in. So there was that kind of security always available to me, which I know makes a very big difference. I don't know if I would have gone to work for a private agency that didn't offer as much, especially financial security.
Okay.
I just don't know. I can't even begin to say. I did apply for positions in agencies that weren't county agencies, and was never offered any of the jobs, so I don't know what would have happened. I mean, even when Marcina offered me the position, it would have been involved going to Stanislaus County. But the other positions that I applied for didn't have the same kind of benefit package, for instance, as the public agency was able to, because I know that private agencies are always struggling and working hard on funding their programs. So I don't want anyone to think that I was able to take chances because I had a sure thing. I think that when you make changes in your life like that, there's always good and bad to look forward to and risks that you need to take one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So without taking those risks, you won't have the exposure and you won't have the opportunities to meet and work with all the wonderful people that I worked with out there, both in the department as well as other county agencies and private agencies in the schools, and that was just a pretty wonderful time.
So what are you looking forward to on October 27th, which is when you're going to get inducted into the Social Work Hall of Distinction?
What am I looking forward to? Well, I have some people who are very important to me who are going to be coming to the event.
Okay.
And I'm very pleased that they're going to be there. Several of my family members will be there who will give me a lot of support, and my husband, of course, will be there. But also, I'm looking forward to seeing some of the past inductees, like Ellen, although I understand we don't have any word yet on whether she will be coming, Ellen Dunbar.
I'm hoping.
But I understand Jane Kurihara is planning on being there. And I'm delighted that Arita Kroll said she would come. And
John Hitchcock said he's going to come. John and Ida are going to come.
Oh my gosh, how wonderful. Oh.
So you might want to tell people, for the sake of this interview, what was your relationship with John Hitchcock?
Weren't you working there at the time?
No, but I know that you were. I think I know what it was.
My first year of my graduate field placement. And it was at Hillside's Episcopal Home for Children. I think it was my first year. Anyway, John was the executive director, and I couldn't think of anyone who was more fatherly to all of the kids and all of the staff, although sometimes he was pretty firm about what his expectations were. But the facility was so well run, the kids were so well cared for. The staff was very collegial. It was difficult. I certainly didn't have the exact same relationships with any of the children on my caseload as I did when I was an intern at Hillsides. But John was just a really special person and really a fantastic director. And the interesting thing is I later met his wife, Ida, when she came to work for Los Angeles County, and I was a manager at the adoptions division. And Ida said she came back to work because their son was going to a very expensive school and they needed the money. But the two of them I consider very good friends, and am delighted to see them when I happen upon them, especially at concerts.
Yes. Yeah. So on October 27th, we're going to have a great time. We're going to induct you into the Hall of Distinction, and it'll be a wonderful meet and greet and a networking opportunity.
And certainly a greater honor than I could ever expect. I had to get rid of a lot of paperwork and stuff over the years since I retired because it was taking up a lot of room. And I think some of the things that I threw out, I probably could have used in preparation for an interview like this, but I certainly would never in any way, shape or form have ever expected that someone would remember that I had done something in my career and think that it was worth thinking about or talking about.
Well, you're very humble, but the committee voted you in, and we're honored to have you. And we'll be looking forward to October 27th, and we'll all have a great time. And I think it'll be another milestone and memorable occasion in your career.
And that, I'll keep every piece of paper, except some of it I'd have to print out because it was email. Okay. But thank you, Colleen. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Kathy.